It's been more than a month since the release of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and the game has been an absolute blast. It feels like reliving your childhood with the return of the Sparking series, or also known as the Budokai Tenkaichi series. The game is by no means perfect, it has plenty of issues, but still it was really fun, especially if you play more with the single player content or with your friends. It's not meant to be competitive in my opinion. With the franchise also celebrating its 40th anniversary, I think there's never been a better time to be a Dragon Ball fan, especially when it comes to their games. We pretty much have everything covered as the games offer something for everyone. Want something similar to the Budokai series or you're a big fan of fighting games, you've got Fighters. Want to relive the story of Dragon Ball either again or for the first time? There's Kakarot. You want to create your own original character in the Dragon Ball universe? The Xenoverse games have you covered. Or you are a fan of arena fighters and you just want something similar to the Budokai Tenkaichi series, then there's the recently released Sparking Zero. It's just been amazing to be a fan of Dragon Ball with the newly released anime too, Daima. But before this though, what if I told you there was a time when being a Dragon Ball fan was pretty rough? Aside from the games, there wasn't much new resource or material from the franchise for us to enjoy. They did release that one OVA back in 2008, Dragon Ball The Return of Son Goku and Friends. Of course, at that time we didn't know that they were teasing and planning for something big in the future. And during this time then, the games that we got were, let's just say they were pretty divisive to say the least. You either loved them or found them to be disappointing. Of course, I'm talking about the Dragon Ball games of the Xbox 360 and the PS3 era, between after Budokai Tenkaichi 3 and right before the first Xenoverse game, excluding Infinite World and the handheld titles. When I played them as a kid, I couldn't help but feel a bit let down by them. They weren't bad, but they just always seemed to fall just short of greatness. Except for these. We'll get into it. You see, at the time, these games were marketed as the next-gen Dragon Ball games with HD graphics and all. However, they were inevitably overshadowed by the PS2 era games, like the Budokai and the Budokai Tenkaichi series. Those games after all set an incredible high bar because of their fun gameplay and the choke full of contents that they had, like huge and expansive story mode, massive roster of playable characters, and the numerous stage locations that you can pick from. Arguably the peak of Dragon Ball games at the time, which is why there's always that lingering feeling of just missing short of their potential when I played the Xbox 360 and the PS3 titles. Maybe that's also unfair of me given how exceptional their predecessors were. After all, most people fondly remember of games like Budokai 3 and Budokai Tenkaichi 2 and 3 and not their previous versions. And so now, with the amazing state that we are in with the franchise and their games, perhaps it's worth revisiting those games to give them the due diligence to see whether they were better or worse than I remember them. So to start, I won't be aiming to 100% complete all of the games, but instead I'll try to focus on playing each game extensively to get a solid grasp of their gameplay, all the features that they have, and to play through as much of their single-player campaigns without diving too deeply into its side content. So without further ado, we can start with the first game on the list, Dragon Ball Z Burst Limit. The game was released back in 2008 and was the first Dragon Ball game with HD graphics on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. It was developed by DIMS as a spiritual successor to the Budokai series. If you also see the visual of the game, it's essentially just straight up HD Budokai, and the gameplay also follows suit. Though it do look a bit weird at times, like you can't see the character's jawline at some angles. Combat features light and heavy attacks for combos, a key blast button, and a guard button. Directional inputs can be used to execute a different combo, the direction to launch your enemies, and to execute your special attacks which are part of supers and ultimate attack that uses up your key meter. You also then have your usual multiple health bars for the characters alongside a stun meter. I would say the combat is quite solid overall with a sort of rock paper scissors approach to a lot of the actions in the game, where certain moves counter others. For example, a charging smash attack will launch your opponent and can armor through light attacks but will lose out to a simple heavy attack or throws. If you also just keep blocking your enemy, you risk being staggered by an unblockable heavy smash, which will leave you open to like a super beam. Hence why it's better if you can try to dodge their attacks instead, which you can do by pressing the guard button at the right time, or you can also sidestep them as well. There are also a lot of movesets here in the game that just adds even more depth to the gameplay. Not to mention there are also a variety of defensive options that you can use for your gameplay, but they do require precise timing to be used for the most part, making them a bit of a challenge to get good at and to master. But once you get there, you practically will feel like Dante with his Royal Guard style. That said, the combat isn't without flaws. I have some nitpicks with it. Firstly, why the hell is there no ki charging in this game? I mean, I get it, your ki will regenerate passively over time or when you are attacking your opponents. So yes, the combat was then designed with this in mind, but it just makes it annoying that whenever you want to power up your character or do an ultimate but you don't have enough meter for it, so you are forced to wait or to attack your enemy for your ki to be regenerated, which can be easily solved by giving us the ability to charge our ki to begin with. Then there's the drama pieces. They can activate when a condition in the fight is met, which will give the characters stat bonuses. They work as like a comeback mechanic while also making battles feel more dramatic and more interactive with the scenes that some are taken from the anime. But the issue with them is that some are short, but there are also longer ones which for me just disrupts the gameplay and can kill momentum since they can't be skipped. Really, they feel more like interruptions than a meaningful mechanic for me by the end. And lastly, directional inputs can be slightly unreliable for me. Like when I try to input direction commands for special attacks, sometimes they don't even register the input properly. Like I get it, ultimate attacks can be interrupted, right? But it feels terrible that whenever you needed to use your super attacks, it just doesn't come out. Instead, what came out was these small fireballs. Very nice. There's also not that much single player content in this game for you to do. You have your usual story mode, but it only covers the Saiyan Saga until the Cell Saga, and even then it's more like a Cliff Note version of the story. It only focuses on some key fights from each of the story arcs, which is then presented as missions with varying difficulty levels. Not the most compelling story mode if you ask me. The cutscenes and animations look great. They were able to faithfully recreate them from the show, but unfortunately there are plenty of abrupt cuts, especially the cutscenes at the end of some of the missions. It just makes the storytelling a bit less coherent since the story continuity between each mission isn't that great to begin with. Though I do like a bit with the Bardock and Broly's what if story in the game. It was nice to see Bardock interacting with some of the Z fighters, especially with Goku at the end, even though it was pretty short overall. Also, the selection of stages in the game and character costumes were pretty limited too. So you'll see some mismatch in background and outfit during some part in the story mode. Not to mention, the roster of characters aren't that big either. Aside from the story mode, there's the trial mode, which consists of survival, time attack, and battle points mode. Really, they are just arcade-style gauntlet mode that you can play around with. I would say though, playing it on multiplayer is nice if you can have friends over to play it locally. But there's also online too, but I mean there's gonna be no one that's playing this game online though. And if you have some troubles with understanding the game the first time around, there are decent tutorials that you can try out to help you understand most of the mechanics in the game. Or you can dive into training mode to practice and lab out the game and the characters there. Overall, it was a pretty solid game for their first outing in the HD era, with a couple of things or two that could have made the game even better. It then confuses me why they didn't make any follow-up for this game that could have fixed some issues that it had and can also add more content to it. But we'll never know. After all, right after this game, they release Dragon Ball Raging Blast. The game was released in 2009 and was developed by Spike as a spiritual successor to the Budokai Tenkaichi series. It brought back environmental destruction and battle damage for the character's model. The visuals of the game looks good, though some characters look a bit weird, like Android 18 for example. The game features a bigger roster of characters than Burst Limit, since the story mode in this game this time around covers until the Majin Buu saga, as well as the Bardock and the Broly arc. However, the character roster still pales in comparison to even the first Budokai Tenkaichi game, with there being only 45 playable characters excluding their forms in Raging Blast 1. Though it was really cool that the game features Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta and Super Saiyan 3 Broly to be playable for the first time in the series, as they were huge what-if forms amongst fans even before the game came out. But it was weird why Ultimate Gohan wasn't in the game instead. Now, the combat of the game is not bad. It can feel a bit sluggish and less responsive compared to the combat in Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Of course, they did iterative improvements for that. But there's a bit of a learning curve and complexity that you'll need to overcome at first in this game. But once it clicks, you'll understand more with how the flow of the combat works. Though if you still feel a bit overwhelmed by it, there's the tutorial that can get you up to speed with all the mechanics in the game. I'm telling you, there's quite a lot. So in the game, you have the attack button, key or smash button, character specials, and the dash button. You can also ascend and descend with your left shoulder and left trigger buttons respectively. For basic combos, there are multiple movesets of rush attacks by chaining lights followed by the smash button, resulting in stagger attacks at the end that can stun the enemy for a bit, leaving you a window to either extend into longer combos or to do your super and ultimate attacks, which can be executed by using the right analog stick if you have enough meter for them. Though doing the same rush attack combo twice will instead act as a finisher, ending the combo and sending the enemy away. You can also transform your characters mid-battle into another form if, again, you have enough key meter for it. Because there aren't too many movesets in the game and the inputs for all the combos in this are quite linear, the gameplay can feel a bit repetitive at times, since all the movesets and attack patterns are generally the same across all the characters, with the only uniqueness that they have being their character specific signature attacks and some of their supers. Moving on to the story mode of this game, it was pretty decent. It's more of a menu progressing story campaign where you can select which arc and chapters you want to play through, kinda like how Burst Limit did. They have these cool diorama figures too for each chapter, using scenes and shots from the anime and the manga. Though the story cutscenes and animations were somehow worse than the ones in Burst Limit. Even though it was able to tell its story more, it wasn't able to recreate scenes as good as the ones in Burst Limit. Also, the characters just have this stiff look and animation to them. I kinda wish they had fleshed out the cutscenes even more since they weren't able to deliver enough emotional weight for players to be engaged with here. Pretty much the story mode can feel more like a chore at times. It didn't help that you'll need to replay each chapter again and finish all the missions and tasks to earn this star currency. You can use and trade the star currency in the star shop to unlock stuff like alternate costumes, background music for the museum, locked story chapters, and many more. Despite the drawbacks, I do really like the inclusion of the many what-if scenarios. It was cool seeing how the story would go a bit if they had gone with a more different direction, and seeing characters that I have never met before in the show interact with each other was fun too. But the game does have several glaring issues, with the first being is its camera. Genuinely, I feel like sometimes I'm fighting against the enemy character and the camera. We can't control the camera since the right analog stick is already used for your super and ultimate attacks. Because of that, you can't really adjust the camera and it's just really janky. It will even go wild at times if you super dash towards your opponent. Dashing is also a bit of an issue as it sometimes doesn't track towards your enemy that well. Both the camera and the dashing issues are also exacerbated by some of the stage design in the game. Like, I get it if they wanted to show off a bit of environmental destruction in the stages to make them seem more dynamic, but some of them are just horrible to play on, especially stages that have underwater segments or high verticality. Wrangling the left analog stick to recover your character also never works. I don't know how hard I should rotate my stick, but pretty much I feel like I was never able to recover my character after being attacked by my opponent. Now, aside from the story mode, there are plenty of other modes in the game too. There's the online and local battle with split screen, the museum for viewing collectibles and other extras, the dojo for tutorials and practice mode, ultimate customized to change and create loadouts for your characters. By using the capsule currency, you can buy stat items to strengthen your characters. Then there's the tournament mode but requires player 2 for some reason, so you can't do a single player tournament. And lastly, the Super Battle Trial where it has arcade mode, time trial, and all of that. My thoughts on the game is that it's a fun game, albeit with notable shortcomings that detract from the gameplay experience, like the camera issues, lackluster stages, and a story mode that had the potential to be even better. The what-if scenarios though do carry the game a bit to be more worthwhile for friends to play with. Ultimately, the game gives off a nice foundation that they can continue to build upon. Which brings us nicely into the next game, Dragon Ball Raging Blast 2. The sequel to Raging Blast that refines and improves the gameplay of the first game. It was released in 2010 and was also developed by Spike. There are plenty of things that they improved for this game, like firstly is its visuals. It has better lighting and textures for the stage environments, alongside the characters now having their shaders and models updated slightly, making them look less weird. They are more shiny now though. A lot of the single player modes from the first game also returned. You can now put and insert CPUs in the tournament mode without requiring player 2. There are also a lot more playable characters. Ultimate Gohan is now in, alongside even other characters from the movies. Not only that, there are more stages that you can pick from to play. They also fixed the problems that Raging Blast 1 had with their stages. There's now not too many vertical slopes and terrains that can hinder the visibility of the camera. Though it's not perfect, it still feels far better than the camera in the first game. The combat of the game feels a bit more refined as it still follows the same foundation and formula from the first game and improves upon it. Same movesets and inputs for combos, the right analog stick for your super and ultimate attacks, character signature moves, pursuit attacks, and all of that are still in the game. Pursuit attacks though feels better and much more responsive here. Like if you do it right, you can even extend your combos from it, or you can just launch your enemies away. It makes the game feel less repetitive by having more actions, options, and approaches that you can do in battle. At the same time, however, it does make the game a tad more on the aggressive side. Like I can just be stun locked by a really long combo. I won't be surprised if infinites exist in this game. Dashing and especially super dashing feels better too. Again, they're not perfect since some terrains can still block and interfere you from dashing towards your opponent properly. But I feel like it just tracks much better overall compared to the first game, and the camera wouldn't go spastic anymore. You also don't rotate your life stick anymore to recover your character. Now you'll need to press the face buttons as fast as possible, which I think was more intuitive, and I was able to recover my characters plenty of times. There's also a new mechanic that they added to the game, called the Raging Soul system, which you can pop it right after maxing out your character's key meter. It will basically power up your character, boosting their strength and defense, but while you're in that state, you won't be able to use any of your supers and ultimate attacks. But the combat does still have one drawback. It's regarding movement when you are close to your enemy. In the first game, while movement felt a bit sluggish, it still felt slightly more responsive compared to this game. Here, it just feels less responsive somehow. You see, when you are near the enemy, pressing the dash button along with forward or backward on the left stick will make your character perform a slight forward or back dash, and double tapping left and right will make them do a sidestep. But in this game, they feel very sluggish. Like sometimes it won't register my input properly, or it can even accidentally register it twice somehow, while I just wanted to do it once. Which just made movement in the game feels weird overall. Same can be said with defending here. I wish they added more defensive tools in combat to balance out the more aggressive gameplay that this game has, since they nerfed the teleport dodge to the point that it's pretty useless now. It has a very long wind-up when it's being used. Another weak link of the game has to be its main single-player campaign, mainly because it doesn't have a story mode. Like, why? After improving and refining the gameplay, it could have been the perfect opportunity for them to flesh out and improve the story mode from the first game. Instead, they opted to skip it entirely. If they didn't want to do the classic story mode for the game, they could have at least created an original non-canon storyline for it. But alas, what we got in the end was the Galaxy mode. The Galaxy mode was like this arcade-style gauntlet mode where players can do many varieties of battles for each of the characters' campaigns. For some characters, the sequence of battles aligns fairly well to how it went in the show, but some of them do come with gimmicks. Such as battles where your HP will decrease over time, or you need to defeat your opponents within a time limit, or even starting out the match with just 1 HP. Why? Thankfully, you can use items. Items can be unlocked by completing these tasks called perfect actions from some of the battle missions. You can then use them to seal and mitigate the stage gimmicks, allowing you to complete the missions in a breeze. You can also use items to just buff up your characters in general. Completing battles unlock rewards such as costumes, music, character transformations for their campaigns, and artworks. You can view them in the museum. But you'll also need to beat the bosses in each character's campaign to unlock more characters, which can be a bit too much to grind for as the missions will feel quite repetitive and monotonous to do. Beating the bosses will also give you one of the Dragon Balls. You can collect all of them and be given the choice on stuff that you can unlock like new moves, stages, and music, which slightly can be a bit underwhelming. Overall, the main differences between Raging Blast 1 and 2 are that, while yes, Raging Blast 2 is a more polished game than 1, but it does replace the classic story mode with a more arcade-styled mission-based campaign. But both still feel quite grindy to go through. Also, I feel like Raging Blast 1 had a more balanced gameplay with its combat, while 2 leans heavily into a more aggressive gameplay. I will say, Raging Blast 2 is actually a pretty good game, and it's better than from what I remember of it as a kid. So with that, I think the games are heading in a good direction. They could flesh out the base of this game even more to make probably the ultimate Dragon Ball game for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Oh boy. Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi. The game was released in 2011 and was again developed by Spike. I swear they must have worked to their bones on releasing these games annually, and it shows with the quality of this game. Why? Let me tell you. This game is pretty bad. The game has all the usual game modes like the games that came before it. Local and online battle is here, there's the tournament mode, the museum or known as the capsule house in this game, and the customization mode. The first thing that's kinda disappointing about this game is that the roster of characters is smaller than Raging Blast 2, with only around 44 playable characters, excluding their other forms. But the bread and butter of this game are its two main single-player campaigns, the story mode and the new hero mode. Now, the story mode is your usual classic story campaign that covers the entirety of Dragon Ball Z and some of its side stories, along with a short section of GT where you'll fight Omega Shenron and Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. I would say the overall story mode campaign was done pretty well in this game, partly because now we have the free roam overworld again. The last time they had this was in Budokai Tenkaichi 2. Oh, overworld map, how I miss you. It was exciting to revisit and explore the world of Dragon Ball again, especially now with it being full HD. Of course, not only do we get the Earth overworld, but we also got the overworld map of Namek as well, which was great. The cutscenes in the story mode were also done much better than the ones in Burst Limit and Raging Blast 1, as they were able to do a much better job of portraying key story moments fully from the series, though their facial expressions could have been better. Though what truly stood out were the remade and redrawn anime cutscenes that were created specifically for this game. They look really good, to the point that it might likely have left fans wishing for a full anime remake of Dragon Ball Z. Of course we never got that, and it also makes me wonder a bit why some of the high quality animations here weren't repurposed for Dragon Ball Kai at the time. The story sequences were split off into multiple chapters in each section of arcs. But what's pretty annoying is that the text scroll at the start of every chapter is really slow. I don't know why they didn't add a speed up button for it, or they could have just made it scroll faster in general. And in the story mode, there are plenty of minigames and set pieces that help to break up the gameplay to be less monotonous and just to spice it up a bit. But the problem is that they aren't that great. They're quite janky and not that fun to play. Now, the second single-player campaign, which was showcased as one of the big selling features in its marketing material, was the Hero Mode. This mode features an alternate storyline where you can create and play as your own character, the first in the series, though you're only limited to create a male Saiyan character. So I made mine bald, and I'm gonna name him Chuck. In this mode, your character starts off weaker compared to how strong the rest of the characters in the roster are like. So to increase your character's stats and make him stronger, you can train your character with a selection of characters that you can pick to be your master, learning their fighting style, their movesets, and also getting some items that can help to increase your stats even further. You can also grind out side battles on the overworld map, but they only give you a tiny stat increase compared to the main missions that will give you tons. The story in this mode revolves around finding and figuring out who's behind the chaos that has taken over the world. It's pretty decent overall, nothing too groundbreaking for you to be crazy about, but from what I read online, many people have speculated that the story takes place far after Dragon Ball GT. Also, I can barely tell if my character has transformed into a Super Saiyan or not. Oh, I also wanted to point out that the music in this game has no right to be this good. It's probably the best one here compared to the rest of the games in the list, as it just invokes the right sense of nostalgia and amazement towards the franchise. Like, it just really fits with Dragon Ball. A lot of the tracks are mostly this rock-style shonen type of tracks, but surprisingly there are also some techno ones as well. The two main campaigns sound alright so far, so what is that people don't like about the game and said that it was bad? Let me talk to you about its gameplay. Because it's atrocious. Remember what I said about Burst Limit with how the combat felt solid with some depth thanks to the many movesets that it has and the way how certain actions and attacks can counter others and vice versa, making it feel like rock paper scissors, and a huge emphasis on feel right there. Now, imagine stripping away all the execution and skills needed to play and be good at the game, streamline everything and make your inputs for your attacks to be simplified with just button spams, and for it to always ends with a rock paper scissors QTE where you'll have to pick a button and hoping that your enemy picked the wrong one, or you'll have to guess which button that they pressed. Yeah, no, it's pretty stupid. The combat in this game is just downright awful, with there being no skills involved to be good at it. Because at the end of the day, everything just boils down to a game of chance. Like sure, in most fighting games, losing to a wrong guess is fine because there's still some level of skills and execution needed to close out and win games, or even to pull off a crazy comeback. But here, you can lose to purely random chances. It just makes the whole combat feel so trivial. Like, it's just straight up a rock paper scissors flowchart simulator with all the stock animations that they reuse for a lot of the actions in the game. Playing it makes me feel like they tried to make a Dragon Ball game that can feel much more cinematic, easy for new players while also addressing some issues that the previous games had. But the problem is that they tried it by removing the things that makes those games fun to play, like the hectic nature of them instead of actually fixing the issues there and making them fun. Like removing any kinds of interactivity that you can do on the stages and make them as an over-glorified backdrop instead, or locking supers and ultimate attacks behind an arbitrary mechanic. This game is just not fun to play and is a hot pile of mess. I tried giving this game a chance, but it's just as awful as I remember it from playing it back in the day. Like I didn't even want to try on finishing the story mode of this game. I don't know why they named it Ultimate Tenkaichi in the West, since it kinda gives off a false impression that is related to the Tenkaichi series. You know, the games that have an immense level of action and interactivity in its gameplay. In Japan though, it was called Ultimate Blast. But really the only thing that's ultimate about this game is that it's an ultimate disappointment. But still, I can give a bit of respect to this game, since a lot of the directions in the game here will serve as a precursor and pave the way for better future games. Like the Xenoverse games with its focus on character creation, and Dragon Ball Z Kakarot for its RPG elements and a faithful retelling of the story. Now for the next game, it's technically not a mainline game, but I thought it would be fun for me to put it here. It's Dragon Ball Z for Kinect. The game was released in 2012 for the Xbox 360's Kinect. I mean, what did you expect from its name? It was developed by, you guessed it, Spike. Again. But this time they've become Spike Chunsoft after a merger between Spike and Chunsoft. Again, what did you expect? The game looks straight up just like Ultimate Tenkaichi, since they just reused the assets from that game. Even the music in the menu is the same from Ultimate Tenkaichi. There are only two playable modes in the game that you can play. The classic story mode where it covers the main battle from the Saiyan saga until the Majin Buu saga, and the score attack mode where you can try to get the highest score. I guess they weren't able to figure out how to make local multiplayer battles work. The game also has this card reader where you can use and scan the game's QR cards to the Kinect. You can get them from pre-ordering the game or from other promotions. They primarily are just used for additional content like characters and power-ups. The game has around 50 characters that you can pick to play as. Of course, the only difference between them are their supers and ultimate attacks. So how this game works is basically it tries to immerse us to become and play as some of our favorite characters from the show, with the use of the Kinect to motion sense our gestures and movements. So it will try to track our movements of punches and even doing a laser wave. On paper, that sounds awesome. I mean, who has never tried doing the Kamehameha wave or the instant transmission in real life when they were still kids? The issue though lies with the execution of the game and its technology. You see, the Kinect was released during a time period when motion sensing in games was the craze, after how popular the Wii was amongst the mainstream audience. It prompted the other two console makers then to try to make their own motion sense hardware for their systems. Sony had the PlayStation Move, which is just their own version of the Wiimote and the sensor, while Microsoft went with a more ambitious direction in trying to make a controller-free motion sensing device that instead can track our body movements, gestures, and voice commands. It was initially a really cool concept and device, but then we found out that it was also riddled with some issues. After all, it was their first iteration of the device and they had to fit it all within a budget so it wouldn't be too expensive. Which means the Kinect wasn't able to reach its full potential as the tracking can be unreliable at times since without a controller it's less stable overall. And so with that context, this game was also a mess true and true. It's very janky and barely responsive in reading our movements and motion inputs. And since the gameplay only gives you a limited movement as it confines you to a stationary position, all you do then is basically just flailing your arms to do punches, key blasts, and all of that. And that's it. That's all what the gameplay does. It's more of a novelty gimmick and a tech demo for the Kinect, rather than an actual proper game. It's very unresponsive with a very repetitive gameplay and a pretty bad game all around. But hold on, let me say though, I bet you it will be extremely chaotic and fun to play if you have friends over and drinks to go alongside it. Imagine blasting and screaming the Kamehameha waves while being drunk. Don't scare your neighbors though. And so, moving on to the last game on the list, Dragon Ball Z Battle of Z. It was the last game for the generation, as I wouldn't count the first Xenoverse game in since the game was a cross-gen title for the PS4 and the Xbox One as well. This game was released in 2014 for the PS3, Xbox 360, and Vita. It was developed by Artnik this time. Finally, Spike must have been relieved to not have continued working on another Dragon Ball game after that stretch of developing them annually, but they would later on be the developer for Sparking Zero. This game is a more arcade-inspired team arena fighting game, where a team usually consists of 4 players duking it out against another team of 4. It's very similar to games like Dissidia NT and the Gundam Extreme Versus series. Please Bamco, port the Extreme Versus games to PC, I'm begging you, please! The game puts a heavier emphasis on online multiplayer as there are 2 online modes in the game that require you to be logged into the console's network, and there's only one offline single-player mode. The 2 online modes are the co-op mission mode where you do PvE missions alongside your friends or other people online, and the other is the battle mode where you do PvP teaming up and fighting against other players. Because of that, there's no local multiplayer this time around, which is weird since the Gundam Extreme Versus games on console does have split screen while having a similar gameplay. And the only single player content that you can do is the mission mode. It kinda covers the story of the show a bit loosely to fit with the structure of the missions and its gameplay. It covers from the Saiyan saga to the Majin Buu saga with some what if missions on the side. Though characters from then the latest movie at the time, Battle of Gods, were in the game too. Can you imagine how hyped my younger self was when they announced and released that movie after a long hiatus of nothing new for the series? Aside from that OVA, there are over 70 characters that you can unlock and play as in the game, with the roster having 4 types of characters. First being melee types, strong in close combat and can do melee combos, Ki Blast types, great for long range attacks, support types, having powers like heals and plenty of other support abilities, and the Interfere type, having abilities that can interfere with the enemy's movements. You can also customize and power up your characters through the card system, where you set cards for your character's stats. You can get more cards by grinding and completing missions in the game. Another way to buff up your characters further is with the use of items that you can buy. Usually you're only limited to using just 1 or 2 item cards per character though. So how was the combat of the game? Well, I actually thought that it was pretty decent. You got your health bars and your key meter, but the game has this life counter for the amount of times that your characters and teammates can revive. Once that counter runs out though, you basically lost the game. The gameplay flow works pretty well, especially if you are accustomed to the Gundam Extreme Versus games. But the parts where that game shines, this game kinda falters. You see, the Gundam Extreme Versus games are, well, I'm not sugarcoating it, a much better game by plenty of margins compared to this game. It has tighter controls, well thought out systems, and more polished overall. It also feels much more organized to play since it's 2v2 compared to a party of 4 in this game, where it just becomes harder to track everything and coordinate with your teammates. Doesn't help that the camera sometimes also has problems with tracking your locked in target, which can throw you off guard and expose yourself to the enemy. There are plenty of issues like this that just make the game feel frustrating to play at times. The AI in this game is also pretty bad. Like playing in the mission mode, at least they're able to heal me at times, which is great, right? But I feel like they almost never tried to res me right before I was about to get revived. They also easily get caught by the enemies a lot, causing them to die easily, which just eats up your life counter and can make you lose the game. You can instruct your AI teammates with the D-pad whether you want them to be either offensive, defensive, or etc. But again, the AI is generally bad. I feel like sometimes they're more of a liability in the game. And another major issue that I have with the game is its visuals. I understand that the graphics weren't necessarily the best since they had to make the game work for the Vita as well. It's that, the thing is, the game has this very weird color contrast and filter to it that kinda makes it harder for me to be able to track my opponents through the already pretty chaotic map and the also terrible color contrast. It also hurts my eye a bit after playing it for a longer period of time. The game then just ended up looking much worse than Burst Limit, the first game on this list. I can see this game actually being much better to play on the Vita than on a home console, but only to play it like in short bursts and not to binge through the whole thing in one go. While the game made a decent attempt in creating a more online multiplayer-focused game that nobody's gonna be even playing it in 2024, it still fell short due to its visuals for me, limited single-player content with its terrible AI for your teammates, and a gameplay that overall could get some more polish to it. And there you have it, an overview of all the main Dragon Ball games that I played through from the 7th generation of consoles. This gen had plenty of mixed and divisive opinions towards the games, as some were warranted while others were less so. It also probably didn't help for the developers that the PS3 was pretty notorious for being difficult to program and develop games for. Hence why a lot of multi-platform games at the time were generally better on the Xbox 360. It probably also pressured the devs to deliver their games within a tight deadline, which might have sacrificed the overall quality of the games, so I do have my sympathy for them there. But it's been fun to go through all of these games and to see whether they were as bad or turned out better than I remember them. So how about I ranked all of these games from worst to best? Starting off with Dragon Ball Z for Kinect. It feels less of a game and more of a tech demo for the Kinect. It's very janky and the gameplay is also very shallow at best, but I think it makes for a fun game for drinking parties. 5th place goes to Ultimate Tenkaichi. They tried pretty hard to make a good story mode for the game alongside the new hero mode, but it is completely dragged down by its gameplay. The combat is an overglorified rock paper scissors flowchart simulator with many QTEs that just made the game completely not that fun to play. In 4th place, it's Battle of Z. It had a much better and slightly more engaging combat than Ultimate Tenkaichi. It does have an interesting concept in making a team arcade styled arena fighter, but it still fell short due to 1, its gameplay was a bit rough around the edges, and 2, its visuals hurt my eye a bit. There's also only one single player mode available as it is a more online multiplayer oriented game. Now, we're moving on to the top 3 and this is where the games are, I will say, starting to be good and fun to play. But they still have some parts that just drags them down from being amongst the greats. So starting with the 3rd place, it goes to Raging Blast 1. The game has a lot of content for you to do with a decent amount of characters to play. Its story mode is also decent with the many amount of what-if chapters that in my opinion made the whole mode much more fun to go through. While the gameplay is generally good and fun to play, it still has some fair shares of bugs and jankiness to the gameplay that can make it a bit frustrating to play at times. Now, 2nd place and 1st place for me can be interchangeable depending on my mood, since they have some aspects that they're good at compared to the other. But I think I have to put Burst Limit in 2nd place for now. In my opinion, this game has the most depth to its gameplay compared to the rest of the games here, as it has tons of movesets and tools that you can use in combat. You can also feel that the characters play a bit differently from each other. Though there's still some nitpicks like you can't key charge in the game and the drama pieces can just disrupt the gameplay for me. The story mode also feels more like a cliff notes of all the important battles from the story as it unfortunately only covers until the Cell Saga. And the roster of characters is quite small too. But with what they have, at least they are still able to faithfully retell its story and sort of punch above its weight class with its gameplay. Which means the 1st place has to go to Raging Blast 2. Even though it doesn't have a proper story mode and I do find its single player campaign to be a bit lackluster, but the gameplay more than makes up for it as just being really fun to play, as they improved and refined the gameplay of the first game. The roster of characters are much bigger now and I think at the end of the day, that's what matters to a lot of fans. At its core, that's what makes Dragon Ball games special for a lot of people. They allow us to just have a great time playing the game as some of our favorite or even obscure characters from the series, either alone or with friends. They embody the joy of enacting and controlling crazy battles just like how they would be from the show. I mean, there's a reason why Budokai Tenkaichi 3 was so beloved even to this day. But after playing through these games, I do find a sense of appreciation for them. The developers clearly put an effort in trying to make good games with what they have and are able to do. So they had to experiment with some new ideas to make up for all the limitations and hurdles that they were facing with. Some of which succeeded while others fell short. But at the end of the day, I do think they definitely paved the way for the Dragon Ball games that we have today, as we get to be a part of the world yet again.